And quite a mess back there. You can turn in your Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Deuteronomy chapter 4. Before diving into Deuteronomy again, I want to spend just a couple minutes discussing the idea of worldview. There are basically just two options for how you view the world and indeed the entire universe. It's what we call our worldview. We can consider our world as either being what we could describe as a closed system or an open system. And in a closed must be because people naturally desire to worship something, and we see this in environmentalism or global climate change. They're up as idols. And that's the closed system worldview, and the alternative to this, of course, is an open system worldview. And we call it open system because something can interact with the world. So the open system worldview allows for and even expects God to be involved in creation and in the affairs of the universe, the earth, and man. This is certainly what the Bible teaches. It begins with creation. God created all out of nothing. Man has value because he was created in the image of God. And throughout the Bible, you have this, of course, this open system worldview. I came across an article for the past 2 months. This open system worldview has been on full display, impossible to miss. God's hand in the affairs of the world, focusing particularly on the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And in these verses that we are looking at this morning, we will observe more of the Lord's doing within the people of Israel, in particular on their future destruction, their restoration, and their distinction. Psalm 118 that we read in the call to worship, and act corruptly and make an idol in the form of anything, and do that which is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, so as to provoke him to anger. And we'll stop right there for a minute. It's somewhat difficult to believe that this verse follows directly after the previous section, which we looked at last week. And you can scan with your eyes up the page. In verses 9 to 14 of chapter 4, Moses had encouraged the Israelites to be diligent to remember 40 years earlier. God had displayed some of his glory and his holiness and his law. How 5 basically opens up with when you make an idol. When I read that, I think you can't be serious. Moses has just warned them not to do that, and then he says you're going to do that. And that's exactly right. Moses is prophesying that they will. In fact, in verse 25, I see Moses saying that 6 actions will occur. You can see it as from this verse. First, you will become the father of children and children's children. And Second, you will have remained long in the land. Third, you will act corruptly. Fourth, you will make an idol in the form of anything. Fifth, you will do that which is a series of blessings and curses. Blessings to Israel if they are faithful to God, and curses if they forsake Him. And I would encourage all of you to read chapter 28 sometime this week. It made me think of a program called Scared Straight. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where a judge will occasionally send a juvenile offender to visit a prison and talk with inmates with the hope that seeing how bad it is might deter the juvenile from a life of crime. And when you read words of they prosper in all that you do, chapter 30, verse 15, see, I have set before you today life and prosperity and death and adversity. In that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in His ways and keep His commandments and His statutes and His judgments, that you may live and multiply, and that the Lord your God may bless you in the land that you are entering to possess it. Quickly from the land where you are going over the Jordan to possess it. You shall not live long on it, but will be utterly destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord drives you. There you will serve gods, the work of man's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. So in these verses that I just read, Moses up to is they're in foreign lands and they're worshiping idols. That's quite an indictment. God's chosen people will follow after idols. Read through the Old Testament, and with the rebellion of Israel comes warning after warning, prophecy after prophecy of the punishment that will occur. And several hundred years after Deuteronomy was written, after Israel's high points under the leadership of Kings David and Solomon, the nation splits into two kingdoms, Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah to the south, and both are eventually conquered and the people removed from the promised land and sent into exile. Israel in 722 BC by the Assyrians, and then Judah in 586 BC by the Babylonians, and then again by the Roman Empire much later. And yet even in the prophecy, love Him with all our heart and all our soul, meaning with all our being, with all that we are. God doesn't want us to have a relationship with Him in which He's just an addition to our life. Lord, and listen to His voice. This is a yet to be fulfilled prophecy. It likely refers to the time of Jesus' second coming. In verse 31, it says, God will not forget the covenant with your fathers which He swore to them. This refers to God's covenant with Abraham. So what we know from these verses is that at some point Israel will be restored. In Romans chapter 11, Paul refers to this. Let me read from verse 25 in Romans 11. In these verses that Moses highlights, Moses begins this section with a series of rhetorical questions rather than just stating a fact. Rhetorical questions often are used to get us to think about a subject a little more deeply. And so Moses asks these three questions. The first one is verse 32. Indeed, ask now concerning the former days which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and inquire from one end of the heavens to the other, has anything been done like this great thing, or has anything been heard like it? This is a unique occurrence, a unique situation. Question number 2, verse 33, has any people heard the voice of God speaking from the midst of the fire as you have heard it and survived? No. Question 3, verse 34, or has a God tried to go to take for himself a nation from Egypt by his great power, driving out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in and to give you their land for an inheritance as it is today? And then Moses concludes this passage with verses 39 to 40. Know therefore today and take it to your heart that the Lord, He is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. So you shall keep His statutes and His commandments, which I am giving you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may live long on the land which the Lord your God is giving you for all time. Know therefore. So as a result of all this, heart, obey. So you shall keep His statutes and His commandments, which I am giving you today. Keep them, follow them. And in verse 40, we see two of God's covenants on display. So God's covenant with the people of Israel that was given on Mount Sinai to Israel through Moses is called the Mosaic covenant. And it was what we call a conditional covenant. That means it was dependent on Israel's obedience, on Israel's faithfulness. Those blessings and curses shows the dependence on how they are going to respond. And that's what we see in the first part of verse 40. So you shall keep His statutes and His covenants, which I am giving you today, that it may go well. And the Abrahamic covenant is an unconditional covenant, means that God will fulfill it regardless of Israel's frequent rebellion. And we see some of this at the end of verse 40 when He says, that you may live long on the land which the Lord your God is giving you for all time. The people of Israel have a place in God's plans. That land is given to them for all time, and they will return and follow God. The people of Israel have a place in God's millennial kingdom, as does that piece of land, Canaan. So we've seen in chapter